Welcome everyone. Thank you for being patient. We are going to start. Are these things working? We're going to start our little seminar. So we're not going to show you I want you all to look at this teeny little thing here. We're not going to do that. I want bigger topics, and we're going to start with some things I think are really important, some concepts. Okay, so yesterday, I can't remember, spokes. There was another topic the previous day, but we're going to start with we'll quote famous bike mechanic. It's going to kind of lead the way. Ian MacKay, famous song, Flex Your Head. Flex, but famous mechanic, nobody knows that one? No. Yes, Stu in the audience, he gets a free bottle opener. Now, what do I mean by that, flex your head? What he was talking about, you actually flex your bones when you ride. What we're talking about, stay with me, properties of material. We're going to talk about bearings, but before we talk about bearings in your bike, you got to know the stuff that it's made out of. Everything you have is going to flex, right? To some degree or the other. All right, some more, some less. When I teach young mechanics, our NICA team has got young race mechanics. The first thing we start with, you think we start with the bike? No. Properties of material. Now this is a steel spindle. Do you think it flexes? Yeah. It does. Watch. Did you see the what this? Look now. You know it does. This is an interesting thing. We're talking about flex, not breaking. It doesn't break. When you ride, your quadriceps, your femur, your tibia, all that, when you're stressing that when you're riding, your bones are flexing. Hence, flex your head. Does that make sense? You're tensing, yes, muscles contracting. Now, how do we know that this flexes? This came off of this very sweet old bike. Fat Chance. Why do we know that? If you look at something called witness marks, you can look at these little lines. God, they're way out there. I'm going to go up here. You spin this, you see how it's different colored, how there's different shading. It's shiny and then it's not shiny. As it turns around, you're flexing it harder this way and this way. How do we pedal? We pedal, sir? How do you pedal? First one leg and then what do you do? Okay. And then the other. Then what do you do? Then the other one, back and forth. He gets a pint glass. He's right.
Thank you.
Yay! So, what does that mean about bearings and how are we getting there? We better define what a bearing is. Bearings are a mechanism that allow motion in any equipment, controlled motion along a path. Now, what is not a bearing? Let's show you something that's not a bearing. Air is not a bearing. It's allowing motion, but it's not controlling it. The bearings in your bottom bracket allow for motion in rotation. There's another bearing we have. Is that a bearing? He does have a bearing. Take your handlebars and push straight down. Down, whoa! What did that do? Those sliders, we call them bushings, those are in fact a bearing, a type of bearing. Absolutely. Bearings don't always rotate. They allow for motion, right, along a controlled path. Now, think of the bearings that allow for rotation. Well, where are they? Where are they? What rotates on a bike? Number one, what?
A wheel.
A wheel. So, this goes round and round. This is rotational. Wheels are rotational. Bottom bracket's rotational. What else is rotational?
Headset.
The headset is a thrust bearing, but it's good anyway, so give him one anyway. We don't want it to rotate all the way around. That's right. What do your feet go on? Pedals. All of those and bottom bracket, they're all flexing. Now, your bearings, depending on the style of bearings, we have two different styles. This one is a so-called cartridge bearing, all right? And then this one is your traditional, what's called a cup and cone. So before we get to the cartridge, I'm not going to call it a sealed bearing. Here's the cup and cone. So this is a traditional style. We have a lock nut, and inside is a steel nut with a cone shape. A cone shape. So we have a cup, right? We can all make a cup. Here's a cup. And then there's a ball bearing inside the cup, and then the mirror image, a cone. The ball bearing fits between the two. So as it rotates, the balls are rotating around and round, round and round.
Sorry.
So if there's too much play in your wheels, it's clicking back and forth all the time. It's basically impacting as you go down the road. It's going to wear out. But if your hub is too tight, what can happen to the hub? Friction, and friction is going to cause wear, right? Now, is there a perfect setting for your hub? Well, there's a good setting for your hub, but with enough use, it's going to wear out, okay? So the cup and cone has an adjustment system. You're able to adjust this and overhaul it and grease it. That can be a good thing. Now, this is kind of on so-called on the outs. If we look at a, let's call so-called modern bike, like this one, we'll get this up here in a second. We have what's called a cartridge bearing. Now it's a ball bearing system. Inside the seal, let's pop this open. Pop this open with the seal pick. So in a cartridge bearing, there's a rubber seal. I can lift that up. Pow! A retainer and ball bearings. Surprise, surprise, right? It ain't rocket science. So that rubber seal goes on. The idea is it's going to help keep out dirt and water. Do you think, now people will say these are sealed bearings. Sealed against what? That's just a simple rubber piece rubbing against the inside. You think it's sealed against water? Yeah. You know how small a water molecule, you ever seen one? They're pretty small. They can get in there, all right? So these can be popped out. You can clean, but what you cannot do here is take them apart and put them back together, okay? It's not gonna happen. Now this is not a cup and cone. You could call this one a cup and cup. So the inner race is gonna be a cup shape. There's a ball bearing, and the outer race is another cup, and they rotate around each other and around each other. So that bearing's going to spin round and round and round and round. Now, with the one that's new, let's get this big right here. Whoop. Oh. We got cartridge bearings all over here. Let's pull this thing up and look at the front. So right here is a very classic cartridge bearing hub. Now, this one, bearings on both sides. There's no true adjustment on here. What happens is you bring the fork over till it touches the hub, we lock the fork down, and then it's good to go. Eventually, you're gonna get play in here. If you've checked that the setting is right, the play is actually in the two cups. So we had the lower cup and the outer cup. The ball bearing is eventually going to wear a path inside. So now, effectively, it's larger, right? The bearing's a wee bit smaller, and it's going to jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. Once it jiggles that way, what do? You get a new bearing. You get a new bearing. If your bearing is rough, this is really nice. When the bearing feels really rough and grindy, what do you think's happened to that bearing? It's pitted. You put new grease in, is it going to fill in the holes? No. Once the bearing gets pitted, right, it's like the road you're driving on. Once potholes get in the road, do they fill themselves back in? No. We don't repave the bearing. So it's replacement. So these cartridge bearings are replaced when they wear out. So that's a common hub. Let's talk about the bottom bracket. Here's a typical cartridge bottom bracket. So this threads into the bottom bracket. There's that rubber seal that can be peeled off. So it's fun. Some people like to peel them off and then grease them because it's entertaining. Is it, once it wears out though, it's not going to do any good. If you did it on a regular basis, it might help. So here, we're bringing the crank arm up to the bearing and then you're done. It's a mistake on a crank to press the bearing tight into the bearings because you're going to side load. If you recall, the two cup and cup. If you tighten too much and press too much, you're going to offset one of the bearings. You're going to jam. There are actually bearings designed for that kind of load. We're going to back up to the concept again. Now, you think things spin round and round. They do, but there's also more than one load. Remember, you're riding down the road, you're leaning here, you're leaning here. Bottom brackets, you have flex left and right. What about the wheels? They're seeing impacts left and right. You bet. This is not spinning like straight, just like in your electric fan at home where there's no other kind of load. There's definitely side loads here. It's going to wear out and have problems eventually. So things simply don't last forever. The newer bearings, this is an interesting thing. That's a big 30 millimeter spindle. If you looked at our old Fat Chance, look at this teeny little thing. Oh, look at that. That ain't gonna fit. Well, what did they do here? They made the spindles here to flex less. Do you think this spindle will flex in here? Oh yeah, it's gonna flex, right? You bet. Not as much, I agree, but they're making them out of aluminum and making them lighter. There's gonna be some flex. Okay, but now let's talk about the ball bearings. When they started to make these bigger and bigger, the ball bearings on these are actually larger. These are teeny weeny little bearings, basically as big as a headset. Now we talked about rotational. Let's talk about thrust. Bring your bike on up forward to the people here. Point the bike at him. He's going to go on the road. He's going to go for a ride. Turn to the left. He's going to turn to the left. He's going to turn to the right. Now, stop. If he turned that much to the right, what did he just do? Bam! When you ride your bike, how much do you turn your headset? Little bit. Now that's a lot of fun. So the bearings are seeing the same pounding in the same little area, right? So all you do is this on a bike, right? You turn just a little bit. Now, you ever feel pitting in a headset? You pick it up and it's kind of notched. Think of all the little bumps you hit on a ride and then the big bumps, all right? All those little bumps you're hitting in the same place, even with the suspension fork, are pounding up into the bearings. So on a headset, what bearings are going to wear out first? Top ones or the bottom ones? The bottom is taking the pounding, all right? So there's a thrust washer here, turns just a little bit, rotational here, pedals, again we have rotational, bottom bracket rotational. Oh, one more bearing. Where are more bearings on this bike? Suspension, linkage, suspension linkage, you bet. So there'll be little cartridge bearings in here. So think about hitting a really hard bump. How much does your suspension move? It's almost like a head, right? It's just like a headset. It doesn't spin round and round. So the little bit of motion actually makes it harder on the bearing. The bearings are going to wear out, all right? So if you ever pull your suspension off, your wheel off, pull your shock off, it should turn smoothly. If it feels notchy, it's bad bearings. You need new bearings. So, in conclusion, understand the property of materials. Things flex. That flex is so important to understand how it's going to operate, how you service it, right? And then what to replace it with. You're going to replace it with a new one, basically. And pressing them and in and pulling them out, you know, that's a different story for a different Sea Otter. So get out there and remember, flex your head. Thank you.